Hey, thank you so much for watching, listening. Totally excited to have you hang out today. We're continuing our series called Show and Tell. Did you ever do show and tell when you were little? I did in elementary school. I thought it was the coolest thing on the planet. I would bring stuff from home. My home had like weird stuff. That's what my friends always told me, because I'd bring like oil lamps. Like, what isn't? That's exactly what my friends would say. What's an oil lamp? Well, it's this little thing, little contraption from the Middle East, like Israel, Egypt, and they put oil in it with a little wick sticking out of it. You could light it, and it would be like a little candle. It's like a precursor to a candle back in historical development. So I bring an oil lamp, and my friends at school would be like, "You are such a weirdo, Sarah." And I was like, "Yeah," but that was show and tell for me. I was like, "Ooh, I get to talk about these really cool things." And we're looking at this series, Show and Tell, because Jesus has a classroom in essence. We're looking at John chapter 8, verses like 1 through 11. And Jesus is teaching in the temple early in the morning. And it's like, in essence, his own pop-up classroom. Because as he's teaching, then there's a whole group of people listening, i.e. students, and they're hearing Jesus teach. They're in learner mode, or at least listening mode. And right in the thick of all of his teaching, we find a really interesting experience, because the Pharisees and the scribes bring a woman right into the middle of the whole thing. It literally says in the Greek, in the midst. And they bring this woman and they throw her in front of Jesus and in front of the whole classroom, in essence, all the students. And they say to Jesus, "What should we do?" This woman, here's my show and tell today, this woman, and they point their fingers at her, she is caught in the very act of adultery. And the law of Moses says that we should stone her. Jesus, what do you say? And they're pointing their fingers at her, and they're judging and shaming, and they're embarrassing her. She's humiliated. She's, exposed. She's embarrassed. And it literally says in the Greek, in the very act of adultery. And I just have a side question. I mean, if they caught her in the act of adultery, then hello, where's the man? Because you can't do adultery, like by the definition, it requires two. So how come the man isn't also presented and exposed? That's just another rabbit trail. You could think about that, but it's still worth consideration. But the Pharisees and the scribes are pointing, and they're accusing, and they're judging. And I think this is really important, because I think in this whole show and tell experience, episode, there are different, we talked about in the first lesson here, there are different people in this experience, in this show and tell. And the woman is like the overt show and tell. But what happens here is a really interesting experience, because Jesus doesn't continue to point and accuse and expose and ostracize the woman. The Pharisees and the scribes want to completely, and it's a power struggle. It's a power struggle between them and Jesus. They don't care at all about the woman. They're trying to undermine Jesus, his popularity. They're trying to unravel his authority. They're trying to test him. That's exactly what it says in the Greek. They're trying to test him. And it's the poor woman who is the show and tell, who is the one who is getting completely put in front of everybody for the description as well as the assessment, the outcome. And it's interesting, because the students who are in the classroom, vicariously they're students, they're watching this whole thing happen. And they're very familiar, of course, with the Pharisees and the scribes. They know their mentality. They know what those Pharisees and scribes are going to say. They're going to point and accuse and judge and condemn. But they're in the classroom with Jesus. And Jesus is a different kind of teacher. He's not the same as everybody else. And so when we think about this, and I said it last week, I said, some of us are students in the classroom. Some of us might relate to the woman caught in adultery, or the man caught, if he was caught. Some of us might relate to the Pharisees and the scribes, that we've had a judgmental, hostile attitude towards people who are less than holy, less than righteous. I think we can relate to at least one of these three areas, groups of people. But here's the thing, when we're in the class with Jesus, and Jesus is doing show and tell, then Jesus is the teacher, not the Pharisees and the scribes, not the religious leaders. And I think sometimes if we're not careful, we look around and we look at people, we look at religious leaders, church leaders, pastors, whatever, and we say, well, they're the authority. And if we're not careful, we get distracted by some of that human stuff that's common and accessible. And we neglect to keep our focus on Jesus. And I think in this whole lesson, one of the core things I would say is we always want to prioritize Jesus. Jesus over any religious leader, Jesus over any infidelity, any shortfall in our life, Jesus over any group of people. The world that we live in, we have all these pockets and groups, influencers and people we follow and all this stuff. But we have to keep Jesus as number one, right? He has to be the center. We can't be in the accusing, pointing, condemning mode. We can't be in just like the spectator, woo, kind of hands off, nervous. We have to keep Jesus as the center of it all, as ground zero, as number one. And when those Jewish leaders came to Jesus, they were not only accusing the woman, but they were also questioning, accusing, condemning indirectly Jesus, because they were challenging him, confronting him, and trying to undermine his power, his authority. And I love this. No matter what they did, Jesus still was true to him, his own convictions, his own heart, to who he is. And as you see this whole thing start to unfold and play out, and Jesus unpacks the whole thing, Jesus is the hero. He was the hero before it ever started. He is the hero, and he will be the hero. Because when we keep Jesus as the center, we exalt Jesus, we glorify Jesus, then really what happens is redemption. And I think the people who were watching, the students in the classroom, if you will, I think they were amazed at what happened here. Because the accusation and the condemnation, Jesus heard them all, but it says he bent in the ground and he started to draw with his finger in the dirt. And they kept accusing and condemning and judging and questioning Jesus. And he stood up and he said, hey, whoever is without sin, y'all throw the first stone. And those religious leaders, scribes and Pharisees, he bent down and started writing again. It says they each began to leave one by one, starting with the oldest, until all the scribes and the Pharisees who were accusing and condemning and judging, they had all left. And I want to encourage you that when we keep Jesus as the center, Jesus redeems us. Jesus speaks truth and life. And Jesus gives us hope in a future when there's only condemnation, shame, and judgment with any kind of the human context. So let's remember to keep Jesus as the number one, the core, the central of all of our lives as we live a life of show and tell, showing and telling about the wonders of who Jesus is in our lives. So thank you for subscribing. Of course, love to have you share this with your friends. Hit the notification bell right there. And then I want you to answer this question. What is your favorite thing? It's going to be hard for you, but just think about it. What's your favorite thing about Jesus? Oh my goodness, you're like, one favorite? I like it. Well, just pick your top 1, 2, 3. What do you most love about Jesus? And of course, we're finished with a joke. Woo woo! It's very exciting on the joke. So what do you call a fly with no wings? This is great. One of my friends helped me with this just right before we started. Fly with no wings you call a walk. I know, right? That's so great. Next week will be even better. Thanks so much.